Well, hello, everybody. I'll wait for you to arrive before I say everybody too loudly, but this is Dennis Pethers, and this is the third week or something of me just going through my book, Discipleship. So welcome, please. I've got my comments open today. The first week I didn't. Last week I did. Had some great comments from many of you. Really helpful, and I've stored those. And please comment today. Say hello to me if you want. That would be nice to know who's on. But also, more importantly than saying hello, although saying hello is very important, I'd love to hear any questions you have. Perhaps you might even have thoughts from last time that you didn't think to write down when I was doing the broadcast, and perhaps since you've looked at it, or maybe you've watched it. A lot more people watch it afterwards than watch it live, it seems, which I understand because many of you are at work or whatever, so you can't watch it live. So if you're not watching it live, you're watching a recording, let me say to you, hello, if you're watching the recording, whenever that is. But if you have seen the recording since last time and therefore you didn't comment live, then please feel free, if you're watching it now, to make any comments now. If you want to reach out to me and say, Dennis, there's some things I really would like to share with you, but I can't do it live online, then just send me an email, would you? Dennis Pethers, that's my name, at therooftop.org. Dennis Pethers at therooftop.org. So if you want to write to me, with any thoughts, questions, comments, whatever, I'm really wanting people to do that. So don't think to yourself, oh, I better not write to Dennis because he'll be upset if I criticize what he's saying. No, I won't be upset at all. I really want to hear from people because I want this book to be something which is of real value to people. I don't just want to write my book. I just sense we're at a time where the church has really, really, really got to think through what is it we're about, what's our mission, and how do we really join Jesus in that mission? That's my heart. That's my passion. It has been for many, many years. And that's what I want this book to do, to contribute in a helpful, encouraging, it'll be challenging as well, but an encouraging way as well, for the church to really think about what it means to join Jesus in his mission. So please, 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 if you hear me say anything which you think is really good and helpful and encouraging, then tell me that, so I know that's something which is helpful. If you hear me say something I haven't got a clue what I'm talking about, then tell me that and I'll try and explain it better. Or if you hear me say something and you think, well, I'm not sure if I agree with that, or I'm not really quite sure that's helpful, then tell me that too. And anything you say, I can't definitely say I will do what you say. I may read it, weigh it up and think, well, actually, I take that on board, but I'm going to go ahead anyway, whatever. But I will listen. I will take it on board and think about it and work it through. So any comments you have, I really, really, really want to hear them. So don't be shy and don't think you'll offend me because you won't. Because you're my friends. Most of you watching this will be people that know me, that have, I guess, followed what God has been doing through me for a long time. So I know we're in this together. So I really do appreciate the things that you'll say. So welcome anybody that's just joining. As I was just saying to people, do comment, say hello if you want to, and it'd be great to hear from you. Today we're going to be looking at chapter 3 of the book, which, as I said at the beginning, is still very much being written. I'm not on here giving you the finished book. I'm actually sharing what is unfolding as I'm writing this book. And your comments and the things I'm hearing from you are actually helping me to formulate it better. It's possible. I've changed the title of the chapter last week from what it was originally. I've actually also changed the chapter of the title this week as well. So I think who knows, I might even change the title of a whole section before we finish this, but that's good. That's all part of the process. So the chapter title for this week now, last week's title was Why So Few? And the title of this week's chapter now, as opposed to joining Jesus in his mission, is actually From Few to Many. So that's the title, From Few to Many. And that's what we're going to be thinking about. And in this chapter, as I just teach a few things here today, and then put this in the book eventually, the purpose of this is to lay a foundation. That's the first 3 chapters in the opening section are all about the purpose of discipleship. What is it all for? And in that, what I've been trying to do is to outline what is discipleship about. And then what we'll do as we go on further in the book is we'll begin to go deeper into all the things that I've raised in these first 3 chapters. So the first 3 chapters in many ways are a kind of introduction, setting out where we'll be going, and then we go into more depth after that. So that's what we're going to be doing. So what I'd like to do today is be thinking about from few to many. I've got a few things I want to say, a few pictures I'd like to show you as well as we go through. So from few to many, let me begin by just telling you an outline of what's going to be in the book. And as I reminded you, say it again, I see some new people are joining. please, if you've got any questions or comments, feel free to write them down. And I see a couple of people that I recognize on here, which is great. Sung Tae from South Korea, and my mum from England, and also William Arbelias from Los Angeles, California. So we're spanning the world. Even if they're the only 3 people on, we're spanning the whole world. So that's good. But if you are on and you want to tell me your name and where you're from, that'd be really great, just to get a sense of who's listening to this. So let's get into this chapter then, from few to many. In the last chapter, in chapter 2, I quoted Luke chapter 10, verses 1 to 3, where Jesus said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, the workers are few. Pray the Lord will send workers into his harvest field. Go. And that whole thing, but the point of it, what I was talking about last time, is that Jesus said the workers are few. And I reminded us that 98% of Christians never share their faith with a person outside of the church. And so what I want to be thinking about in this chapter, just introduce some thoughts, is how do we go from few to many? And here's a few things. I have the privilege in my ministry life, whatever, of traveling to many places, and I meet many people. And often what I talk about as I travel, when I'm with churches or individual Christians, I talk about how do we make Jesus known? How do we share the gospel with people? How do we help people to come to understand the truth about Jesus? But I think what I think probably is the thing which upsets me more than anything else. When I say upsets, I don't mean it makes me angry, although it does in a way, but what I guess it's disappointing more than anything is that most often when I speak with individual Christian people about sharing their faith with other people outside of the church, the kind of things they say are, well, they're just so discouraging. Many of them, and I've heard this in so many places, said by so many people, they say things like this: well, I wouldn't know how to bring it up. I wouldn't know how to begin to talk about Jesus. I don't know how to get it started, so I don't do it. And then other people say, well, I just wouldn't know what to say. I wouldn't have any idea how to talk about faith to people. And other people say, well, I don't bring it up because they might ask me questions and I wouldn't know the answers to the questions if they ask me questions. And other people I've heard, sometimes people say, well, what's the point? Nobody's interested anyway. And there's a million other things, and you could think of others. If you've heard others, then please put them in the notes, will you? And I can take them, include them in the book. So if you've heard other things that people say, discouraging things, then put them down so I can include those in the book as well. But as I listen to those things, what it makes me feel is that, well, what are we doing? How is it that we have Christian people all over the world who have been to church for years and years and years? They know the message of Jesus, I guess, because they hear it preached on Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. They might even be in other groups as well, and study the Bible together and everything else. All of this time, for many of them, decades of being in church, and yet the primary objective of church is to make Jesus known, and yet most of them feel utterly incapable of even starting a conversation to talk about Jesus. So here's my question: what's wrong? What are we doing wrong? What's not working? And I guess what I'd like to do in this chapter is to get to the point. Wouldn't it be great if what we could say is, rather than what Jesus said, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few? Wouldn't it be great if we could actually reach a place where we could say the harvest is plentiful and the workers are many? Wouldn't that be a great place to get to? The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are many. That there were Christian people all over the world, just among the lost, sharing, living, being Jesus all over. And the great news is there are many doing that, but there aren't enough. There's nowhere near many. There are some, let me put it that way, but there aren't enough. There are still billions of people in this world who know nothing about Jesus at all. And many of them live in countries that are at least thought to be, in some sense, Christian. I see on the call we've got people from the United States. Hey, John, and also Travis from the Czech Republic. The United States, Britain. These countries were historically seen as Christian countries, but no longer. Most of the people in those countries now have got no connection at all with the Christian faith, and yet we have it, but we don't even know. And it breaks my heart to say this, but many Christians don't even know how to begin a conversation to talk about faith. And friends, I just have to say it, that is a state that we have to change. We can't continue in that place. So how do we move from the workers being few to the workers being many? I want to read you a story that I came across in 2021. I'm going to read it, so forgive me looking down, and I want to draw some things out of it. So it's a little bit long, and I may abbreviate it slightly when I put it in the book. But for now, let me just read it. This will be a good thing for me to do to see whether it is too long or not. But in November 2021, news broke that a man had fallen and was lying injured in an underground cave in the Brecon Beacons, which is a part of Wales. He was miles from the surface, and rescue was going to be incredibly difficult. During the rescue, a guy called Paul and a guy called Steve from South and Mid Wales cave rescue team were interviewed on national television about the rescue. And this is what they said. Paul said, "The rescue started on Saturday about 1 o'clock when the alarm was raised to inform us there'd been an accident underground that resulted in then the initial..." Sorry, let me start that again. "The rescue started on Saturday about 1 o'clock when the alarm was raised to inform us that there'd been an accident underground, and that resulted in an initial response from the South and Mid Wales cave rescue team. We very quickly began to realise this was going to be a very serious rescue to put in place the plans. So put in place the plans to contact other teams. And that's how I got involved, from my team being the Gloucestershire Cave Rescue Group. And then it snowballed out to teams right across the UK." The interviewer said, "How's the person doing?" And Steve said, "At the moment, all I know is that he's doing well. He's a strong guy. So when we first encountered him, we had obviously just had an accident, but he's a good guy and a strong spirit, so he'll be good." Interviewer asked the question, "How complicated was the rescue?" And Steve said this: "The cave is quite complicated and long. There's about 38 miles of known surveyed passages, and it has a range of just under a kilometre, I think it is. It's an extensive cave, and you have to be confident to be in there, which everybody was. But accidents happen. A boulder can stay in place for 10,000 years, and one day it'll just move. That's the way it goes." When we got to him, it was a case of assessing how he was. What would we need logistically in terms of equipment? What's going to come in? Where's it going to come from? Who we need? Any medical supplies? We have team doctors. So everybody was allocated jobs, and the operation to move in took place. And he went on to say it was very slow because they had to go through footpaths or places where there were no footpaths. And it was just a really difficult place with boulders and potholes and crawls and climbs and waterfalls, everything there. But then he said this: "We've rehearsed this so many times over the years. We've had call outs of a similar nature, not this long. So there was nothing that surprised us. We knew how to deal with every problem. It's just the time taken to deal with it. And we had a fantastic team. We called in cave rescue teams from around the country, and everybody responded. This is a completely voluntary operation. Nobody gets paid. Everybody's here because they want to do their best. Everybody did do their best, and the cooperation between the teams and the standard to which everybody worked was 100%. Then the interviewer asked him if he knew how long it would take, and he said, "Well, we didn't know how long it would take." And then the interviewer said, "The thing that strikes me is you guys were incredibly well prepared for situations like this. And I imagine not only the man himself, but his family and his friends are very thankful that it was a long operation, but we hope ultimately successful." And then Steve said this: "Yeah, we're very aware of our environment that we enjoy. It's not a reckless thing we do, and it's certainly no more dangerous than anything else. To be honest, I think it's no more dangerous than sitting on the sofa watching television." So we were prepared. We won't encounter things that we're not prepared for and haven't encountered many times. In that regard, it's something that we know we can do, and the volunteers are all 100% keen, dedicated. Nobody complained about anything. Nobody complained about anything they had to do, and a lot of it involved lying in water with a stretcher being pulled over you, and nobody said no. Everybody did just what they had to do. Everybody was all part of the same team. Then the interviewer said this: "Sounds like a great team. Do you have to keep people's spirits up? Are you singing? Are you talking?" And Steve said, "Oh, the banter, yeah. It can be quite a tough thing, especially when there's a delay and you've got to wait. When we're all soaked through to the skin, and there's always a draft in caves, there's also a chill factor. It doesn't take long to sap you. So keeping your spirits up, we have little treats. We carry little treats in our helmets and just support each other. It's a very friendly environment that we create. We don't try and create it. It just creates itself. And that's the nature of people who get involved doing this. Literally, I was lying in the passage at one point, and to the right of me, there was a Yorkshireman's accent. To the left, there was a Somerset accent. Opposite me was an Irishman's accent. We represented the UK completely. And it was fabulous. It was just like we'd known each other all of our lives. And that tends to happen with these kind of events. So here's this interview with Stephen Paul. They've rescued this guy in this 38-mile long, it seems, cave. And I mentioned this story here because in the last chapter I talked about Jesus coming on a rescue mission, and he asks us to join him in that rescue mission, not to save people from a cave, but to save people from the consequences of living lives that are not the kind of lives that God wants us all to be living. It's what Jesus came for, to seek and to save what was lost, to rescue mankind from the terrible situation that it's in. And there's a few things that I want to draw out of that as we think about how do we go from few to many. How could it be that we could actually have many Christian people engaged in rescuing people from darkness, as opposed to just the odd few that do it? So here's a few things. The first thing that I draw from this, he said this, so everybody was allocated jobs and the operation to move in took place. So here's the first thing. Everybody everybody knew their role. Everybody knew what they were supposed to be doing. They knew where they fitted in the scheme of things. And I compare that often with church, and most people have no idea what their role is in making Jesus known to the world. They just haven't got a clue what they're supposed to be doing, and because they don't know what they're supposed to be doing, they don't do it. Second thing that he talked about at this point, everybody knew how to do what was needed. They didn't just know what their role was, they knew how to do it. And this is what he said. We've rehearsed this so many times over the years. We've had call outs of a similar nature, not this long. So there was nothing, but then he says there was nothing that surprised us. We knew how to deal with every problem. It's just the time taken to deal with it. And we had a fantastic team. We called in cave rescue teams around the country and everybody responded. This is a completely voluntary operation. Nobody gets paid. Everybody's here because they want to do their best. Everybody did their best. And the cooperation between the teams and the standard which everybody worked was 100%. Everyone knew how to do what needed to be done, and they did it. I hope you see the picture that's emerging. If you want everybody to be fully involved in a rescue operation, then everybody has to know what they're supposed to be doing and be able to do it. And that's what is happening here. And then I love this part, the third thing. There are four, and this is number 3. And this I think is one which I want to comment on just a little bit more. Number 3, this is the third thing I draw out of this rescue mission. Everybody was prepared to do what it takes. So he said this. So we were prepared. We won't encounter things that we're not prepared for and haven't encountered many times. In that regard, it's something that we know we can do, and the volunteers are all 100% keen, dedicated. Nobody complained about anything they had to do, and a lot of it involved lying in water with a stretcher being pulled over you. And nobody said no. Everybody did just what they had to. Everybody was all part of the same team. So I see a picture of lying face down in freezing cold water in a cave. By the way, I'm a claustrophobic, so even the thought of going in a cave terrifies me. But lying down, face down in the water for goodness knows how long in a cave, so you can be a bridge for people to walk across with a stretcher so they can get it from one rock to another, I guess. That's your job, just to literally lie there face down in the water. And he said nobody complained. Everybody just did what they had to do. And that picture, I just think that idea of doing what it takes, whatever it takes to get this mission done, to me, that's just a huge challenge. And there's so many. I've just noticed a comment from Travis, which I'll probably include in my book. Travis has written, "In a cave, you're lost in darkness, just as we were once lost in the darkness of sin. Jesus came on a rescue mission to call us out of the darkness and into his light." That's a great connection, isn't it? This man just lost in darkness, but the rescue team went and pulled him out into the light. But the job to do that, the process of doing that, involved a whole team of people. Everybody knew their place. Everybody knew what they had to do. Everybody was able to do it. And then it's not just knowing what to do and being able to do it. There's this other key part as well. Everyone was prepared to do what it takes. And that's something just to reflect on for a moment and think about, isn't it, really? Because to do what it takes to make Jesus known to a dark world, sometimes it's not pleasant. Sometimes it means we have to do whatever the equivalent is of lying face down in freezing cold water and letting somebody walk over the top of us. Whatever that is, I don't know what it is necessarily, but that kind of commitment seems to be what it's about. And of course, it's worth reflecting upon the fact that the one who calls us to join him in his mission, he did something far more terrible than lying face down in water so we could be saved. He actually gave his life and died on a cross. And then the fourth thing, which I think it comes from that story, which all of this is about, just building this foundation about what does it mean to grow the number of people from few to many? How do we get more people involved? And I think that this is the last little part, but I think it's so important, and it's this. I called it activity creates team. Activity creates team. And what I mean by that is that it's when we do things together, it's when we get involved in doing mission, that actually everybody begins to feel this is something they can do. So often in the church is we have a preacher telling everybody they should go and get involved in making Jesus known, and then everyone just has to go and do it on their own. And most don't do it. That's why there's so few, because most people feel I can't possibly do this on my own. But activity, doing something together, creates team. So this is what he said in the interview. He said it's a very friendly environment that we create. We don't try and create it; it just creates itself. And that's the nature of the people who get involved doing this. Literally, I was lying in the passage at one point, and to the right of me there was a Yorkshireman's accent. To the left there was a Somerset accent. Opposite me was an Irishman's accent. We represented the UK completely. And it was fabulous. It was just like we'd known each other all of our lives. And that tends to happen with these kind of events. I'm just getting a note from my good friend Dave Lodge, who's doing that's all right. I just wanted to make sure he wasn't giving me anything I needed to do. So we're okay. So the point is, as they did it together, I love this. I can expand this and will expand this more in a later chapter in the book. But this idea of a Yorkshire man, it makes me think I want to tell a joke, really. What did the Yorkshire man say to the Somerset man? But here's the point he makes. And I love this. It was fabulous. It was just like we'd known each other all our lives. And that tends to happen with these kind of events. And what he's saying is that when you're on mission together and you're paying a great cost and it's uncomfortable and everybody's in the same boat, as it were, with a great objective to see the mission successfully completed, then in spite of the hardships and the challenges and everything else that come, there's a team spirit which comes, which is greater than that. And if we add to this the whole Christian angle, that we don't do this alone, but we do it with Jesus who's with us, and we do it in the power of the Holy Spirit. Friends, I want to scream at the television that I'm looking at right now, or write with such a way that it will jump out of the page and say, this is the greatest wonderful opportunity that we have for church, not to be just a place people go to on Sunday, but church to be a community of people that is so passionate for the mission of Jesus that we get involved in the challenge, but also the excitement and the joy and the thrill and everything else that we get of seeing God transforming people's lives. It won't be easy. We will be opposed. There'll be people that don't want it. We know that. We will have to sometimes lie face down in freezing cold water and have someone walk over us, or whatever that means. But we're part of something which is about the greatest rescue plan the world has ever seen. And that is what we are part of. And that's what we all should be doing. And that's what can happen. And that's why I think it's possible to change from the few to go to the many. So let's just move on. And let me just think for a little while about what I call my heading now. I want to talk under for a moment is I call it creating a can-do environment. How do we create a can-do environment in the church? Because I think often, as I said at the beginning of this chapter, when it comes to sharing faith and telling people about Jesus, most Christians feel they're in a can't-do environment. I can't talk, I can't start a conversation, I can't. It's what I hear over and over again. Most Christians say, I can't do that. And last time in the previous chapter, I talked about the fact that many people feel disempowered because they think that's the job of the pastor, the leader, the vicar, the priest, whatever. But I think also within that, we've created a sense of we can't do this. And we don't, it's not even just because we're not a pastor or a priest. We can't do this because often we think that it's the super elite kind of Christian people that can do it. And one thing I want to focus on for a little while is something which I think has been a contributing factor to that. I have a good friend called Phil Hannam. He's a pastor at Life Church in Chelmsford, and he might be watching this at some point. So, Phil, if you are watching this either live or record, hello. I won't include that part in the book. But we were talking about the book yesterday or the other day, and he mentioned this to me. So I've included it here because I think it's really important. So thanks, Phil, for this contribution. And you may or may not have heard of somebody. His name is James Engel. You probably haven't never heard of him, but he's quite well known for something called the Engel scale. It began with he wrote a book called "What's Gone Wrong with the Harvest." It was published in 1975 by Zondervan. And in this book that he wrote, he included this scale called the Engel scale, which I think is in some ways incredibly helpful, but in other ways incredibly unhelpful. So hopefully we're going to get a chance to have a look at that. Here it is on the screen. Now don't be too bothered about the complete detail of it. What was really good, you can see hopefully what it says. It talks about God's role, communicator's role, man's response, and it's got all these different numbers and everything else there. You can see that. But don't worry too much about the detail. Just a couple of things I want to say. Firstly, I think what was really helpful about the Engel scale was that he made it clear that there was a process that people should go through if they were really going to understand what it meant to become a follower of Jesus. That was really helpful. Because I think so many churches, they would just go out and preach the gospel. Whoever they were talking to, they would just preach the gospel and say to people, you need to pray this prayer and give your life to Jesus. What the Engel scale helped the Christian church to realize was that not everybody's at that place. As you can see, at -8, awareness of supreme being, but no effective knowledge of gospel. So if you go to somebody in that situation and just say, well, you need to pray this prayer, they haven't got the first idea what you're talking about. I would say this, that where I live in the UK, it needs to go much further out than -8, because lots of people in the UK have no awareness of a supreme being at all. So, but wherever it starts, you might be -12 or 13 or even more here. And what you can think about that where you are in your context. Wherever it starts, you can see that he talks about a process where from there, there's initial awareness of the gospel and so on and so on and so on. And it comes through where the person comes to a point of repentance and faith in Christ. They become a new creature. And now they're being in this place of regeneration, of sanctification. And if you look that through, in some ways, as I said, that is very helpful. But where I think it's not helpful is that I think it reinforces in many ways this idea that most Christian people can't be part of the team that rescues people from darkness. Because if you look at it, what it says is, so once you become a Christian, there's what he calls post-decision evaluation, then incorporation into the body, which I guess means becoming a member of a church. Then the way you think and act begins to change. Then you have communion with God, then stewardship, then reproduction. Then internally you work within the church, and then +8, you witness. So why do I think that's unhelpful? Well, there's a few reasons why I think it's really unhelpful. One is that in my experience, and this was my own experience as well, and I've observed it countless times around the world with different people I've met, is when a person who isn't a Christian comes to faith in Christ, something happens in them, and they receive the Holy Spirit of God, and God becomes real, and they want the whole world to know about this God that they've met. Then this is the one in the middle between -1 and +1 on the Engel scale. And I know I did that. I wanted everyone to know about Jesus when I first became a Christian. But the challenge is, well, so for me, let me tell you what it was like for me. So I became a Christian, went to church. I wanted the whole world to know about Jesus. The church I went to, the people there, lovely people, they said to me, well, that's nice, Dennis, but don't worry, it does wear off, as if I had the flu or something. So what I did was, there was a guy there at the church called Colin, and he's kind of seemed to understand where I was coming from. So I remember we went one day to Leicester Square in London, and just gave out gospel tracts to people that happened to be passing by. I had no idea what I was doing, no clue at all. I just wanted people to know about Jesus. And there was one person in the church that was willing to come and do something with me. Nobody else was interested in the slightest. But you see, the challenge is that the second thing, so you get that. The first point is that when you become a Christian, so often that's when you have the greatest passion. And that passion should be nurtured and encouraged and grown. But unfortunately, what happens is, and I've seen this over and over again as well, in most cases, the longer a person is in the church, the less passion they have for the lost. Now, I would really be interested in your story, your response to that. If you have any thoughts that you want to share with me, or anything to challenge that or to support it or whatever, please comment. I'd love to hear it, because that's been my experience. And I know for me personally, I have had to constantly reignite myself to not get drawn in to something which makes me less passionate about lost people. I've had to put disciplines in my life to make sure that I stay connected with people outside of the church. Otherwise, inevitably, what I know would have happened is I would have been drawn into the church so much that I would have lost any connection with people outside. Because what happens is it's almost like an irresistible force. And I don't think that anybody plans this. I don't think it's some devious activity of churches or church leaders or anything like this. But I think what happens is that let me be a scientist for a moment, but I'm not a scientist at all, in the slightest, in any way. But I was thinking about this, and I'm going to put this in the book. Let me just read this. When a force pushes or pulls an object, the object moves in the direction of the force. The bigger the force and the lighter the object, the greater the acceleration, the more quickly it moves. And this force can also make something slow down, speed up, or change direction. And here's the thing. So force creates movement in a direction, and that can be a push or it can be a pull. I think what happens with church is that the force at work in most churches is pulling people to the center of the church, not pushing them out into the mission field. Let me explain what that looks like, because that could be a little bit, if you're like me, science can be a little bit boring. But what I mean by it is that when a person becomes a Christian and they're passionate and on fire for God and want to see the whole world changed, they become part of a church. As Engel put on his scale, they become part of the body. But this church they join inevitably has a whole bunch of things going on, programs and activities and things that it does in the church for the church. And the leaders of the church think, fantastic, we've got this new enthusiastic person who's got all this energy and excitement. Let's give them jobs to do. And before you know it, that person becomes so busy doing things in the church, they don't have any time left to see the people that they used to hang out with who are not Christians. And they're actually discouraged from seeing those people because they're told now they're Christians, they shouldn't do these things that bad people do. And so on a slightly for kind of spiritual reasons, but more, I think, so for practical needs of the church, that person gets, the force is pulling them in. And it's an inevitable pulling that just happens. So no one says, how can we make this person ineffective? No one says, how can we stop Dennis Pethers wanting to share his faith? No one said that. They weren't asking that question. But the inevitable needs of the church as an organization, as a whatever you want to call it, the jobs that need to be done, the roles that need to be filled, inevitably what happens is that person gets pulled away from the mission field and is given tasks to do within the church. And the great challenge of that, therefore, is that Christians begin to see that good Christians, faithful Christian people, what they do is they serve Jesus in the church. And that goes back to the Engel scale. And Dave, do you mind just putting it up again, please? That goes back to the Engel scale and my big problem with it, because what it says is It's when you get to +8, when you've been through all that process of incorporation into the body and everything else, that you then are ready to witness. The problem is with the Engel scale way of putting it, and many churches think this way, is that by the time you get to +8, you've become so absorbed and pulled in and drawn into the church activities that you've got no people left that you can witness to. And I do believe that's a classic reason why we have so few rather than so many. Because what Christians have come to believe is that service within the church, for the church, doing ministry within the church, becoming a deacon or an elder, of course, they're not bad things. Teaching a class, leading in this or that, whatever, all those things, they're all valid things. I'm not saying they're bad things, but the challenge is they are so seen as what good Christians do to serve the Lord, that they get drawn away from the mission field. And so they see their service of Jesus as being lived out, performing functions within the church for the church, and that is somehow sanctified in a way and seen as really, really, really serving the Lord. And what that means is that the people who are lost and dying and in this dark cave of lostness, they stay there because the mission team of the church is busy working within the church. And if that doesn't bring tears to our eyes, then I don't know what ever will. And that's what we have to see change. Right. Sorry, I got a bit passionate there. I'll try to write that with the same passion as I just said it then. And you see where that gets to. I'm just going to take a slight little diversion here. I may or may not do this in the book when I write it. Now that I'm doing it live, this is such a help for me doing this. But I think as well as all of that inevitable force that pulls us in, I still do think there is this idea, and again, it's Engel's kind of supports it and has given the church a way of thinking like this. There is still this idea that it's the elite Christians that do it. So I'm okay serving in the church, but to actually tell people about Jesus outside of the church, well, that's not for. I'm not good enough for that. I'm not up to that. I hear that a lot. I'm not up to that. And so we come back to disciples. And so just for a moment, I'd like just to think about the disciples that Jesus had following him. And ask, were they elite? Were they the kind of great spiritual giants that could do that? Or were they more like us, or were they less like us? And it seems, as I look at it, one of the most profound bits of scripture I find, Jesus, in Luke chapter 22, it says this: when the hour came, Jesus and his apostles reclined at the table, and he said to them, I've eagerly decided to eat this Passover with you before I suffer, for I tell you, I will not eat it again until it finds fulfillment in the kingdom of God. Now, Luke 22, this is towards the end of the Gospels. This is years into Jesus' ministry. Remember we said before, he called his disciples and said he would be making them disciples who could be fishers of men. In other words, disciples that would make disciples. So that's what he told them he would do. So they would therefore spend all this time with Jesus, being helped to become the kind of disciples that he needed them to become. So let's see how elite and super spiritual these disciples were 3 years into spending every day with Jesus. Let's see if they were beyond us in their ability to be a disciple. In verses 19 and 20 in Luke 22, Jesus took bread, gave thanks and broke it, gave it to them, saying, "This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." Now, we know these words, don't we? Most of us do anyway. They're words that are used at the communion service at church when we remember what Jesus did for us. But what's surprising, if these disciples were super elite Christian people, what's surprising is what happens after that. Because in verses 24 to 30, it says this: after Jesus had told them this is his body for them, this is what he's doing, he's giving his body and his blood for them. This is what they say. This is what verses 24 to 30 say. A dispute also arose among them as to which of them was considered to be greatest. And that, you see it? This is the picture I see. And you can read the rest, I'll include the rest in the book, right through to verse 30. But just for now, that's the bit I want to focus on. A dispute also arose among them as to which of them was considered to be the greatest. So here's Jesus, and this is the picture I see. Jesus reclining at the table and talking with his closest friends. who have been with him from the beginning, learning for all these years. And now he shares deep truth with them, his heart about what he's going to be doing, how he's going to give his life, have his body broken and battered and beaten, and his blood's going to be poured out. He's going to do all this for them. And if you were reading that story for the first time, well, you'd expect them to fall face down on the ground and say, thank you, thank you, thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. It's all about you. Everything's you. Jesus, you're everything. But they don't. What they do is they exhibit self-interest. Who's going to get the best seat in the kingdom? Thanks, Jesus, but what's in it for me? What am I going to get out of this? So they weren't particularly super spiritual, were they? It seems like in some ways they hadn't learned anything at all about what it meant to follow Jesus. But here's the remarkable thing. Even though they weren't the greatest people ever, even though they still had so much to learn, even though they still got things terribly wrong, even though at this key point they missed the whole point, here's the thing. Jesus still entrusted the mission of making disciples to them. So here's the thing. If we want to increase rapidly, drastically, the number of people that are making disciples, if we want to turn the few into many, do we have to make everybody a super Christian so they can join the team? Or do we actually recognize that the team that Jesus will work with will always be imperfect people who still get things wrong? But Jesus doesn't depend upon us to get everything right before he can use us. And should the church, therefore, not be a community which recognizes that, and rather than disqualifying people for getting things wrong, help them to see that getting things wrong is actually a step towards learning how to get it wrong less frequently so we can begin to learn how to get it right. Does that make sense? I'm going to embarrass my mum now. She's on this call, but I'm going to embarrass her because I've written a little parable. It's not exactly her, but it's based on her because I think it's in some ways it shows what I'm trying to talk about here. I've actually called this parable "Surprised by Joy." So this isn't actually her story, but it's kind of loosely. Sometimes you watch a movie and it says this film is based on true events or whatever. Well, this is kind of what this is really, but in some ways it just underlines what I'm trying to say. So here it goes. Now, I may put it in a slightly different place in the book when I write it. By the way, any comments you have, please keep. I'm getting some great comments. I'm really enjoying. So please, anything you want to say, just write it down, send it to me. Any questions or thoughts, I really would appreciate them. So here's my parable, the parable of joy, surprised by joy. So as I say, this isn't historically accurate, but it gives an idea of what the point I want to make. When she reached the age of 40, Joy was surprised when one day her son came home from work and told her that he had found God. She had no idea what he was talking about, became even more surprised when she began to notice that her son began to change. She noticed that he became much more helpful around the house. He gradually stopped using offensive words. He became more kind and thoughtful. She wondered what on earth was happening to him. A few months later, her son invited her to his baptism, and because she was his mum, she went. At the end, the man who had been leading said that if anybody would like to become a follower of Jesus, they should come to the front. The next thing she knew, she was standing at the front and felt like she'd never felt before. She had become a Christian. As a new Christian, Joy wanted everybody that she knew to find the Jesus she had met. She still struggled with smoking 40 cigarettes a day and felt ashamed of this when she went to church. She wanted to know how she could help other people to find out about Jesus, but there was nobody at the church who could help her. What disappointed her was that nobody seemed particularly interested in her frequent requests for help. Instead, they told her that she should stop spending time with the people who were sinful and serve the Lord by coming to church regularly, having fellowship with other Christians, read her Bible, pray, and give. Joy felt very confused and torn in two. She read the Bible but didn't understand much of what she read. The things she did understand, she wanted to start doing, but she didn't know how to do them. She began to pray for all of the people she knew that didn't know Jesus, but started to notice that people in church never prayed for these things. She wondered if she should start to pray like they did instead for things that were in the church. Slowly, Joy found it more and more frustrating that now she was a Christian, she was being somehow drawn away from the people that she wanted to talk to about Jesus and into a group of people who wanted to make being at church her focus. She didn't know what to do, so she asked her son to help her. So there's the parable of joy, which I call surprised by joy. I've got a few questions here which will be in the book, so I want to read them to you. And if you think that I could ask different questions or better questions, then let me know. These are the questions I'm going to ask based on the parable of being surprised by joy. And by the way, it's the church that's surprised by joy. They don't know what to do with her. That's the point. That's the reason for the name. So here are the questions I will ask. How likely is it that what joy experience may be experienced by a new Christian if they became a part of the church that you're connected with? Number 2, what are some of the things that are likely to cause this to happen? Number 3, how would you have helped Joy if you were her son or another person that she may have turned to for help? Number 4, in what ways has Joy's experience of church helped or hindered her from joining Jesus in his mission? In what ways has Joy's experience of church helped, hindered her from joining Jesus in his mission? And number 5, what could the church do to change this? So I think what I'm saying in this chapter, as we begin to draw to a close in a little while, is that what we need to be thinking about is, how does church become a community that really is about having a different understanding of what it is that we're trying to do? How do we be about making many people want to be part of sharing in this mission of Jesus? And so let me just get my pages a bit. I've got my pages messed up here. Just give me a second here. I think I did that slightly out of order, what I wanted to do there. So just give me a sec and I'll get back to where I was. That's it. Take 10 seconds, have a drink, have a look, and I just want to get my my things back in order. That's it. That's better. Okay. So what I'd like to do briefly, and I will expand on these more in a later chapter in the book, but I just want to introduce these now in this chapter, and then, as I say, I will expand on them a little bit more. I guess what I'd like to do is think about what would be some features of church as community if it was an equipping community. If we're going to drastically, significantly, the fancy word people use is exponentially, but in a big way, if we're going to see a seed change, if only 2% of Christians share their faith with people outside of church, what would it look like if 20% were doing it, or 30% were doing it, or 100%? What would it look like if we saw, and what kind of environment, what would we need to have in place? I'm just going to mention them briefly now, and then give an example, and then I'll finish. I think there's a few things. One feature of an equipping community, the first one is this: there's clear purpose and there's a vision that is regularly and powerfully communicated. There's a clear purpose and vision that is regularly and powerfully communicated. Just take a second to look at that, would you? And if you have any thoughts on it, I'm going to expand on this more later, but I'm just saying it for now because I'm going to introduce it in this chapter and then expand it later on. A clear purpose and vision that is regularly and powerfully communicated. Second, a second feature of an equipping community: intentional and appropriate equipping for every person, enabling them to play their part. Intentional and appropriate equipping for every person, enabling them to play their part. And thirdly, support and accountability. Nobody is left alone, discouraged, or defeated. So if the force that was drawing people was not a force that was drawing them to the center, but was drawing them to the mission field, to where Jesus is at work seeking and saving the lost and asking us to join him, if that's the way the force is drawing us, these things, I think, would typify what this community of people being equipped actually look like. I think an example of that, and I'll close with this, an example of that is the army. You might think, well, Dennis, hang on a minute, that's a silly thing to compare. But the army, I actually went onto a website And I just found out a typical daily schedule for basic combat training. And I just thought it was interesting. This is what you do if you're training to be a soldier. You wake up at 5 o'clock. 5:30 you line up in company and you perform physical training, calisthenics and running. Then you have your breakfast. Then you train, whatever the training is for the day. Then you have lunch. Then you train again. Then you have dinner. Then you have time for drill sergeants to talk to recruits about any subject they think requires attention. And then there's a chance for them to engage in personal activities and doing the things they have to do. Then at 9:30, the lights go out. And then 5 o'clock the next morning, it starts over and over again. Now, I can hear you saying, and I would say the same thing, but Dennis, I'm not in the military and God never called me to be a soldier. I get that. But the purpose of me putting this up here and just to show the extreme measures that they take is because they have an absolute clear purpose and vision. And that clear purpose and vision is to defend the nation. That's their clear purpose and vision. So because of that, the training they receive is intentional and appropriate so that every single one of them can play their part in making sure that they achieve the objective, should it come to it, of winning the battle or the war that they're involved in. And none of them is left alone. They do it in a community of support and accountability. So whilst it may be that you could say with a lot of justification, church shouldn't be a place that we all run to at 5 o'clock every morning and go through these training sessions every day because we have work and family and everything else to consider. And I get all of that. The point I'm making is that it being equipped to achieve the objective that God has called us to do, which is the mission of Jesus to be completed, is something where we may not do it in the same way as the army does it, but we would do it with the same intention. And we would actually ensure that how we do it would be such a focus of who we are that every single person who's part of church wouldn't just be being told they should do it, and then they sit and wait until they're good enough to be able to do it, which for most never happens. What we should be about, if we want to create a scenario, an atmosphere, a context where we go from few to many, is we should be helping every single Christian person to see that despite their weaknesses and failures, God is still working in them and God can still use them. And then we should communicate that vision repeatedly and powerfully and persuasively. We should equip them appropriately and intentionally, and we should stand together as a team and make sure that we can do this. So that's chapter 3. That's it. Hopefully you've heard it and you've got some comments to make. Please send more. I'm going to keep the ones that you've sent, which are really helpful. And next time when we get to chapter 4, we're going into a new section. And in that one, we'll be looking at what is the cost of discipleship. And we're going to look at that for a few weeks. So thanks ever so much for taking part, for listening, whether you're watching the live recording or whether you're actually watching it a bit later. And you've got some thoughts you have. As I say, if you're watching the recording and you can't comment live, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'll mention it again at the end, please send me an email with any comments or thoughts you have to dennispethers@therooftop.org. And just let me know what you think. You might want to be very encouraging or you might want to be challenging, whatever. I don't mind. I really want to hear from you if you've got some thoughts. So hopefully that's helpful. And see you next week for chapter 4. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye.